Hello, my name is Natasha Musto and I'm an Oxford admissions consultant and tutor here at The Edge. My specialty is English literature. I studied English literature and language at Oxford University, and today I'd like to discuss unique approaches to Paper 2 questions, which is specifically relevant to IB English literature and language students. One of the most important things to do for your Paper 2 essays is to define the terms of the question so that the examiners understand how you will answer them and how you are interpreting them in your essay. A great way to stand out, to create an interesting, memorable argument and get top marks in your Paper 2 essay is to be creative in your interpretation of the question and problematize its terms. Look at the key terms and ask yourself, how can I interpret this in an unusual way? How can I focus my essay in a direction that demonstrates intelligent, independent thought and impresses the examiner? Of course, a key element in that is that you must be able to support and prove such an argument with critical analysis of supporting examples. If we look at our first example, analyse how justice is represented and understood in at least 2 works studied. So the key term here, of course, is justice, and we must discuss both how it is represented and how it is understood. So there's a meaning element to this. So in defining the term in a problematic and interesting way, perhaps you could argue that in your text, it's actually injustice, which is key to the understanding of justice. Absence of justice could also be a key theme. So it's not taking the normal interpretation of justice, it's playing with the idea, changing your interpretation of it to accommodate other aspects of your text. So if you want to discuss the absence of justice in your text, think about how you could link that to the overall meanings of the work. Does the absence of justice perhaps suggest an absence of God? Can you talk about justice in terms of other systems of morality, perhaps? Does justice in this text necessarily mean God? Does it mean the law? How does it work with your texts? If your texts deal with the importance of stepping up and taking control of your own lives, perhaps justice is important to the motivation for this. So think about how you can make the use of the term justice interesting, specific, and unique to your arguments. Does it affect the trust that your characters feel in their society or in the rules of their society? Does it encourage rebellion? Another thing you can do in your discussion of the question is perhaps to discuss the interpretation of justice by the characters in your text and by the society of your text. Perhaps it differs, allowing you to discuss how individual characters define justice versus how the world defines justice and defines what they deserve. A question like this can allow you to talk about many, many different things. And one reason why it's important to interpret your questions in a particular way is that you have likely only prepared for a certain number of topics to be discussed in Paper 2. Therefore, if you get a word like justice and it doesn't perfectly fit the material that you've revised, by twisting your definition of the term and twisting the applicability of it to your texts, you can actually use the material that you've memorized in order to answer questions that you weren't anticipating. And of course, a key thing to do in answering these questions is to link the presentation of justice to the author's message to the reader. What does the lack of justice in this text mean? The absence of justice. How can you link that to the author's messages? So if we look now at a second example, writers often use a character who is alienated from his or her culture or society in order to explore cultural or social values. Examine this idea with reference to at least 2 works studied. So the key term to discuss here is alienated. You must define this in terms of your own texts. A comparison and a contrast of different types of alienation could make this a very interesting essay. So again, the key thing to do is define how you will interpret the word alienated. So for example, you could discuss alienation from family in one text compared to alienation from social engagement in another text due to political class. Other types of alienation people might experience could be based on race or perhaps based on their immigration status. In the case of immigration, characters might be separated from society not only by their lack of paperwork, but by prejudices held by other members of society, or perhaps simply from being cut off from their roots. Perhaps their identity was based in their roots and in a family that's now in another country, and therefore they feel alienated from their present situation. A lack of knowledge of a character's past can also indicate a sense of alienation from the people around him. So, for example, if a character has been adopted, or if a character doesn't know their parents, or discovers halfway through the text that they are not who they thought they were, this might be a way of discussing alienation. So by defining the term according to how you want to use it, you are very flexible in how you approach the essay. You could also problematize the question and make it more interesting by discussing a character who doesn't think they are alienated, but whom you can identify in some ways as being alienated from their family or from society. This is an interesting approach. It's not a way that many students will talk about the question. And therefore, by doing this, you could write an essay that really stands out and is more interesting. If you can answer the question in a way that the examiner may not have thought of immediately, then you are in with a good chance of getting an exceptional score. By defining alienation in terms of a character not realizing that they are alienated from society, you can switch the focus from alienation itself onto characterization. This would enable you to talk about alienation through the flaws or the features of a certain character, which you might be more comfortable doing than by addressing the concept of alienation in itself.